So welcome to today's webinar, DITA for Dynamic Delivery. So I'm thrilled to be your host today. I'm not alone. Before we dive into our subject, let me briefly introduce ourselves. So you will meet with Gaspard Bébié-Valérian, content expert and senior consultant at FeedTopics, and I'm Géraldine Boulez. I'm VP of Marketing. So at FeedTopics, we specialize in content delivery. We help companies offer personalized, relevant content experience to their users and customers, and we provide a content delivery platform. It collects all the content a company owns, so that's structured or unstructured, that can be data or non-data, and it delivers it at scale to all the digital channels that are needed by the companies. So as we manage a lot of content delivery projects, we realize that many companies did not leverage the full capabilities of DITA for content delivery. For authoring, well, probably that was the first instance for authoring, but not really for delivery. And that's what brings us in front of you today. So we'll be addressing three main topics. Firstly, we'll briefly introduce the high potential of DITA for authoring to delivery, specifically explain how it works, how it serves the second part of the process. Then we will discuss what's a content delivery project and how it connects with DITA authoring. And finally, we'll move to the practical part of this webinar. Gaspard will showcase real-world examples of how to leverage two essential characteristics of DITA, granularity and metadata, to create great user experiences. So without further ado, let's get started. So I'm not going to present DITA in details. A lot of you are already CIDM fans, so you know a lot about DITA. I will particularly insist on what makes DITA a great tool across the process. So many of you may be evaluating DITA or have already chosen it for content creation. So the standardized and systematic approach of DITA allows content writers to speak the same language and to apply the same rules. And along with its modularity and its topic-based character, DITA helps create consistent building blocks that will assemble into a vast project, the vast project of documentation, a vaster documentation set. So adopting DITA and DITA authoring enables distributed work among different content writers, different stakeholders, and having work in parallel. One of the key elements of DITA is that content is enriched with attributes and metadata that describe the content and define the relationship between the different pieces. So the structured architecture, the modularity, and the metadata associated to DITA authored content, all this makes DITA a fantastic foundation for content creation. So the main benefit that expected from DITA authoring is the improvement of the content creation throughput, with or without a CCMS. And I would tend personally to say with a CCMS for all the collaborative tools it enables or it provides, the function it adds, all the version and the translation management, etc. But we'll probably discuss later on with or without a CCMS. So DITA is a rich standard that enables content reuse into different documents, variants, customization, versions, and languages, and it's really the silver bullet for the productivity of content creation. You write once, and you use and combine into hundreds and thousands of documents. So definitely, the main purpose of adopting DITA is optimizing the time and effort to generate and to update product content, and then publish. And this is where organizations actually stop leveraging most of organizations stop leveraging the DITA capabilities. How do companies that use DITA for authoring publish their content? Well, the traditional way of delivering content is to publish content as documents. So the content that was created with DITA was born granular and rich with metadata and attributes, often down to the topic level. And then at publishing it, this content ends up frozen into a format or a file. and most of the time it's as PDF documents and or HTML pages. So very often for content creators, this is considered the end of the process. You know, create a document, print it sometimes, or drop it on the file server or on a website. But the time for shipping printed manuals is almost over. I say almost because we are seeing in some industries that it's still mandatory. So I cannot say that the time of shipping printed documents is over, just almost over. And PDF and static HTML on a website is not a fit for all the applications that read and use your product content. This is what is called static delivery, and it's not really what users and customers expect anymore. So, what users want these days is what I would call the app experience. When you are using an application, you are expecting that the content and information you get is served for the purpose specifically and in the format that fits the app. You wouldn't go to Uber Eats and expect to download a PDF menu to order from, you know, and it's the same for your product content. So users want to read your product documentation where they are and when they need it. So that may be from your customer service app, that may be from I don't know, for field service applications. That may be users may want to find a tip regarding the feature that they are using in a software application. They want to find it through the help button that they click. And also you may want to see information regarding a problem. You have a printer on the little screen of this printer. So that's what is called in-product help. And even in the manufacturing and equipment industries, we see some cases. We've had some lately regarding some use cases for virtual reality devices. So content displayed in virtual reality devices. So your content needs to be fit for all these channels and all these type of device, whether this is a laptop, a rugged tablet, for instance, for field technicians, or even a smartphone. Users are expecting an excellent reading experience. And when they are fixing a machine or troubleshooting connectors, users don't want to download and browse the 50 pages of an installation guide. They want to see directly the precise article, the topic, or even the subtopic, or even the diagram that corresponds to the issue they are working on. So users also expect contextualization of content. I think the most telling example is the context-sensitive help that the software users require. You know, when you are having trouble using a functionality in the software, and when you click this help button I mentioned before, you are expecting to get the information on the feature where you currently are, not the full information regarding the software. You want to be able to click on the place that causes problem to understand how it works. But you also want to have the information regarding the version that you are working on, the version of the software you are using. You don't want the generic information. You want some information that is generic to your context, to your options, and even to your settings within the application. So that's what we would call the contextualization of content. And personalization of content is something different from contextualization, context being where you are, the situation. Personalization of content is also a strong demand. When I say personalized, I think of personalized search results in particular. You know, as consumers ourselves, our experience, we'll all expect the Google experience to in everything that we are doing. Anything short from the relevance and personalization of Google search results is irritating for everyone. So with product information, this is the same. When users search product documentation, they want to get the search results that match their profile, their habits, and their preferences. And finally, well, that's just an overview of what people expect from modern content experience, but another point which is quite important, in particular since the last year, users are expecting interactivity and conversational ways of getting information. So unfortunately, because that's a topic of its own, chatbots and generative AI are not going to be the focus of this webinar, although structured content is totally key to this process and to generative AI and to be able to provide this kind of experiences. But we've chosen also to dedicate a session to the topic of generative AI and structured content, and that will be, I think, our next webinar with CIDM. So just having qualified the type of content experiences that users expect, how does DITA fit into that? How does DITA have a role to play here? So, DITA content is a great asset, and DITA itself is a great mindset for modern content delivery. So the structure, the granularity, and the metadata of DITA content are essential to dynamic. So I say dynamic as opposed to static content delivery. They are critical for content integration. So I mean, you need this granularity and you need this metadata to be able to perform integration into the different channels, the rendering into the different channels, the different tools and the different devices. And these characteristics, the structure, the granularity and the metadata, they are critical for the contextualization and the personalization of search results that we mentioned. But we need to take two aspects into consideration. The first one is that the granularity and the metadata that were initially thought for content authoring may not be the exact match with what is needed for content delivery, or they may not be, if they are not a match, they may not be even sufficient, you know, to provide a good delivery experience. So DITA content, as it is usually a great base for content delivery, but it will need to be augmented. It will need to be processed and enriched to be properly used for a good content experience. So that's the first consideration. What's needed for DITA authoring may be different from what is needed for content delivery in terms of metadata and granularity. The second consideration is that interpreting the content granularity and metadata to provide these dynamic content experiences that we mentioned before requires a very good proficiency, if I may say, in content delivery practices and technology. Because you actually need to add a layer between your content and the different endpoints where the content is going to surface. You need to have this additional layer to interpret this content. So there are two ways to do this. One is to, hundreds of lines of code to write and to maintain, in particular, for each channel and application where you want to deliver your content. So that's one possibility, and that's done in some cases. And the other possibility are solutions that are dedicated to content delivery and have the capability to enrich and process the DITA content and serve it properly to all channels and devices all at once. So these software solutions are content delivery platforms. We call them CDPs, and then they manage the delivery, this delivery layer I mentioned before, between the content and the touch points where the users, where the content will surface. So in a few words, CDPs collect, that's what you see like at the bottom of the screen. Content delivery platforms collect, enrich, and transform the content so that it's fit for dynamic delivery. So the collection and the transformation is done thanks to connectors, and Gaspard is going to speak extensively about the specific DITA connectors, because this part of the process is extremely important to enable content delivery. And CDPs also embed all the search and display, the search, that's what the little squares that you see is also here as well, the search, the display, and the interactivity functionalities that interpret the content. It means that actually you can configure the rule you want to apply for content search, for content display, based on some modules and functionalities that do the heavy lifting of ensuring the proper rendering of the content in different channels. That means that you don't need to develop all these functionalities. You have to configure according to your needs, and you can differentiate how you want it to show in the different channels in particular. Speaking of channels, that's a key point for content delivery platforms. that they integrate through APIs. So that in the case of Free Topics, for instance, they integrate thanks to APIs with the different applications and tools where you need to surface your content. So that means you would integrate the content with your helpdesk systems, your field service applications, user portals, websites, etc. So that's the main components that are just embedded in this layer, in this software stack, that are embedded in order to provide the capture and the transformation of the content to make it fit for content delivery, the functionality to be able to display it properly, whatever the channels, and to configure how you want to display your content in the different channels, and interfacing with the different channels of your need, be it these helpdesk tools, different apps, or even simply your website or partners portal, user portal, etc. Across all these functions, content delivery platforms also secure and control access rights to content across the board. So all the content which is absorbed by the content delivery platform, transformed by the content delivery platform, and delivered is monitored and is controlled. So the access rights are fully monitored there. So that's in the context of our experience with content delivery projects, and through concrete examples, so we are going to see how we manage DITA content within our own CDP. So that we are going to illustrate the different types of content experience that you can create with your DITA content. And with this, I now give the stage to Gaspard. He will tell you more about this.
Thank you, Géraldine. So, managing a content delivery project, and moreover with the emphasis on DITA, is a real question. And so we'll dive into the context and explore some key concepts related to a project itself. So the initial context, actually, in my case, is from the professional services team. So we have several customers who arrive, start a project, and then they have different backgrounds. We have various profiles. Typically, they had different content types and authoring environments, or some of them didn't have any CDP. They were just uploading files onto a server. Others already had a CCMS with specificities from the CCMS, and all the customers had printed documentation only. And in this context, speaking about DITA, the daily DITA, we have this phase, which is pretty important. It's the implementation, because DITA is rich and there are many possibilities, many use cases, side cases where actually we need to be able to anticipate, to identify the potential pain points. And that's why the analysis is really important, so that we can anticipate the problematics and solve the potential issues. We have a strong focus on metadata, because in a CDP, metadata is one of the tools used to activate the different features. And even though metadata already exists into content, and even though the tech writers teams have a strategy regarding metadata, sometimes it's not enough. They need to consider to standardize the metadata for the delivery itself. And during this implementation phase, of course, there are validations phase, but there are additional requirements that can only be achieved through customizations, and at last the automation, to make the process flawless and smoother for the users, for the publishers. In the daily DITA task, when we consider DITA in the context of the CDP, there's a big step which is related to the troubleshooting with the project which continue, and the fact that there are evolutions, and moreover with the evolutions of the product of the CDP, which has a specific connector for DITA content. And at last, in the context of DITA, there are regular back and forth between the product owners, the product developers who are in charge of the maintenance of the evolution of the DITA connector, based on the evolution also of the DITA specification or of the DITA OT new releases. And this back and forth, these discussions between the products team and the professional services team and also the customers is pretty important. Not to mention, of course, the partners who have also feedback and information to share with us. And all of that, as far as DITA is concerned, is actually, it's rich. It's much richer. We're in contact with DITA every day. It's a major part of the content consumed by many of our customers, and there are regular questions that relate not only to content authoring or content delivering, or with extensive questions, for example, accessibility, search engine optimization, the display, and considering also specificities from a delivery platform. And it implies exploring additional aspects, functionalities, or considerations related to DITA beyond basic act of content creation. And those are valid questions even outside of a CDP, because they involve us, for example, to ponder a strategy about metadata or about specialization, about the content management or workflows, how to improve a publishing workflow. And all of that is not only related to the CDP, but also to the way you work with content in your teams and how you want to manage content. On the customer side, I briefly mentioned the context, but regarding the tools, sometimes we also need to consider what exists. And there were specific plugins implemented by another CDP. And in that case, actually, we need to understand that in the CDP, there are several mechanics for the content ingestion, the content processing. We may rely on the HTML that is produced by DITA OT, for example, or we may need to enrich this output, or we may also have specific DTDs, RNGs, and transformations. Sometimes also working with DITA means that a customer may still use an old version of the toolkit, a really old, and that may have some limitations, typically when we need to create a specific plugin for transformation to customize an output, and relying on specific extension point from a plugin could be challenging because of the old version of the toolkit. So you need to consider not only the delivery in regard of the product itself, but also of the interactions and the dependencies with the DITA OT, the toolkit. And also this point is important, is the fact that many customers have their content managed in the CCMS, and they have expectations about the built-in features that are implemented into the CCMS regarding taxonomies, variants, or even data elements that may differ from a regular output made locally with Oxygen XML or with DITA OT or in the CDP. So regarding that, I will show several screenshots that are directly taken from the project 3 topics, but from a generic perspective, as we could imagine, for any CDP. In 3 topics, we have a way to manage the custom toolkits with the possibility, the ability to upload a custom toolkit and to define a trans type and to set it in the administration, and also to configure specific parameters. Customers' clients are able to manage it on their own, and that is particularly useful typically when there are regular updates and when testing specific developments is required to see how the output is processed and provided in the result, in the final output in the delivery. We have also some specificities. In a CDP, you have connectors, and you may have connectors for different types of content. In the case of DITA, there is a specific connector. In our case, we rely partially on the DITA OT HTML rendering. And that means even though the customer defines a specific trans type or has specific transformations with plugin, they are additional and specific features that are built in the connector, meaning that, for example, the automatic support of the DITA values, instead of using the DITA val ref, or instead of producing a variant, a version at a time, you can directly submit an archive with dozens of DITA vals, depending on your project, and then automatically all the different publications that should be filtered thanks to the DITA vals will be automatically created in the CDP. Considering metadata, there are retrieval stages which are directly made from the XML source. And that is a point which is important because you may need to implement a specific processing for metadata in your content, and you would like to automate, for example, the combination of metadata, or you will need in a specific plugin, you will need to define specific processes for metadata definition. And for that, the DITA connector in the CDP is able to retrieve metadata from the XML source. So that means when you use a specific trans type such as HTML5, and you create your transformation with the post-processing, you may see that metadata is not reproduced exactly as you would intend, and it's because the DITA connector has its own specificities. And that's why we see in this diagram the interdependencies between the different bricks. We have DITA for the content authoring, we have DITA OT for the transformation, and we have the CDP for the delivery. But it's not that simple. It's not a straight line. There are back and forth occurring between the three blocks, because sometimes, of course, when you are in a development for a custom plugin, there are iterative processes which involve to update content, looking at the result, and updating the plugin itself, the transformation with the accessibility. It's the same with the CDP. You have a specific plugin, you observe the results in the CDP, you need to update your plugin. And also what is interesting is the fact that it may also have an impact onto the content itself. Why? Because there are some mechanisms which are absolutely specific to the CDP. For example, the clusterization, or for example, the way to manage variants. And so based on that, we have specific metadata, semantic metadata, which are absolutely unique and specific to the product itself. And that means it's not written in the specification. It's not specific to the spec. It's something that is provided into our documentation, and making the authors aware of the specific elements to be implemented and included in their documentation is another step. And that's why sometimes it is important to consider the process from the content delivery to the content being authored, that there are updates being made by the authors. And that is pretty important. There is a dialogue, and we need to consolidate to build the trust. First, to reassure the teams, typically when they transition from a system to another. More importantly, when they transition from another authoring system, when they didn't have any clue about structure of documentation, but also when they were absolutely skilled about DITA, moving from a CCMS to another, or moving from a CDP to another, involves several considerations, because you may need to adapt content to the CDP functionalities, or also to include minor updates on the content side and the automation. And we arrive at one point of the presentation, which is important in the recurring work with DITA and with the CDP. It's the question of granularity, which often arises when we have customers migrating from a system to another without a reflection on structured content, or transitioning to a new paradigm that involves thinking about content reuse, establishing a strategy for metadata as a mean for search retrieval or indexing classification. So regarding granularity, content architecture is a major concern. It's a consideration. There are several questions that may arise, such as, is my content searchable up to the topic level? Are metadata specific to a given topic? Is it accessible at the topic level? Is it possible to reuse content easily? Is it possible to navigate between different publications with cross-reference, what we call cross-book links, which means, for example, being able to publish once a resource, such as a glossary, and after reusing it across different publications or having the references working. So by scrutinizing content, we are able to understand the logics that are implemented into content and also to provide support and being able to help in the process of delivering content. One of these points is chunking. With granularity, we have chunks of information. Oh, it's not only about tweets, of course. In the context of documentary content, the question arises as to whether the content should be merged or determined as individual units of information split. In a CDP, it goes further. First, the question of accessibility of the features. We have, for example, the quick actions, which are provided both at the publication level or at the topic level. And that means when you have the quick actions, you offer a set of features to the end users in the CDP, for instance, to create personal books, sharing the URL of a topic instead of the publication, bookmarking, or printing just a topic, or sending feedback just on the topic. So that means you don't have a monolithic piece of information. You have bits of information that are potentially combined together for the personal books. That's the idea. You can create your own books by combining different topics or bookmarking them because you have a document that contains hundreds of topics, but there's only one that interests you. And there are also considerations to make with the chunking, typically with the navigation and the hierarchy of the publication. Of course, with DITA, when we think about chunking with the chunk to content, for instance, we expect having the merge of content, but we may expect and would like to see still a consistent navigation and structure for the table of content. Regarding that, we have specific paginations. We are able to configure paginations based on the chunking. The content-driven pagination is able to determine if a topic ref uses an attribute for the chunking, the chunk to content, for example, and based on that, and defining also a priority between different paginations type, we are able, after in the delivery, to propose a different navigation for the end users. In this example, on the left side of the table of content, we have the 4 main sections, while on the right side, we have another table of content, which is a secondary table of content of differently called the mini-talk. And the mini-talk provides access to the sub-levels of the content. And it's based on chunking on the attributes that were declared in DITA. Looking at these snippets, we see that we have the topic refs and we have the chunk to content relatively normal. The only difference lies also in the output class FT merge. When I said before in the diagram that sometimes there are interactions between the CDP and the content authoring, that is a good example. The fact that you may leverage the chunking to apply a specific pagination and getting another type of table of content, right? But in some specific cases, you may need or want to force the full merging without having the effect of the secondary table of content. Typically, you would have a disclaimer. It doesn't have any added value to put a disclaimer topic in your publication in the table of content. So then you can add a specific attribute with the output class FT merge. And that is pretty handy. Regarding granularity, another example is the short test with a short description. Based on element with the PH element, you can tag and apply a specific attribute for the profiling using DITA values, of course. As you can see here, we have the short desk using different values in the element with the other props attribute. And we have 3 datables. Once it is processed, what we see is that we have a different description displayed. So that means we go beyond just the reading experience, because in the CDP, we also have the search engine, which is pretty important, and how search results are provided. How do you access to the search is an experience in itself. And being able to provide consistent, insightful information from the start, not only while being in the reader, but also in the search page, is important. So of course, my examples are on purpose. They are pretty simple, but it's just to make a point about the fact that using DITA and having the possibility to profile your content, it will be reflected directly in the CDP. And we have other mechanisms for chunks of information. We have the ability, for example, to define different versions or variants. And rather than listing similar documents one after the other in the CDP, it's possible to improve the search experience. And for that, instead of having the search results blocked down with many results, and which may be different variants with slight differences, you may want to indicate that they are related to each other. For example, with what we call the clusterization, both available at the map or at the topic level. In the first example here, we see at the topic level, in here at the map level, where we have the user manual. This mount has 2 variants, and for that we have custom metadata. I've mentioned that we have metadata available both at the map, but also at the topic level. We have metadata which is authored by the tech writers, and there are also specific metadata with custom keys which are very specific to the project, and the cluster ID is a way to clusterize publications together and to provide this typical drop-down menu here. And both with DITA which automatically generate the corresponding publication and which create the clusterization, but also with metadata, you can leverage metadata to get granular accessibility to content. In this case, we have 3 drop-downs menu, one for the device, another for the version, and another for the locale. And all of that is based on metadata that is declared, and which involves that you don't need to return every time to go back into the search results from a single place, which is the reader. You can switch from a version to another. And if you are not satisfied with the locale, or you want to see the latest version, you can switch also for the version. And that is powerful because the experience is improved. You are not lost in the search experience trying to find your way. You directly have access to the correct user manual, to the correct technical documentation, and you stay within the same reader. That means the reader is the place where content is provided, but you can directly switch from a version to another, and it's automatically listed. That means you don't have to find your way in the different versions. It's provided as it. Granularity means also bits of information which are beyond topics. Typically, this example is pretty interesting. I like it. It's the collapsibles. So we have information that is sometimes it's not useful to provide it as it, and we want also to improve the clarity, the readability of a document, and we use the collapsibles to make content a bit more easy to read or to retrieve your way in documentation. However, in the CDP, you may have features already implemented by default, and usually collapsible and accordion, it's just a piece of JavaScript, just is easy, because that means every administrator will need to create their own JavaScript snippets to implement a feature, while actually in a CDP, the features are already implemented, and that's the case here with this simple feature. As we can see, the official documentation in our case indicate a standard declaration, and it relies on specific class with the output class FT expanding block content and with an ID. That's the way, for instance, we could imagine declaring a collapsible. Yeah, but I had a pretty interesting use case with a client who had many different collapsibles. This client had definition lists and wanted to see the definition terms shown for the labels. As you can see here, we have show Apple, show collapsible DL section, show section details, and all of them are based on the definition terms. So we cannot rely on a generic feature. We need to customize it. We have a table, the label, the string that are used for the label are different also. And here for the code block examples, that's the same. And so the solution is pretty simple. The DITA connector, as I said, relies on DITA OT. We can just implement a plugin for that. We will work on the transformation. We will also leverage the existing functions that were developed in the product. If we know that the FT expanding block content class must be used with an ID, we will just actually improve, extend the possibilities of this generic function from the product, and thanks to a DITA OT plugin. And that is amazing. That's why it is pretty interesting, because we are into the consideration of content transformation and how do we interconnect with the product and its specificities. Regarding granularity, I mentioned before the glossary. The glossary is amazing. You have the gloss term, the gloss definition, the gloss surface, and you can define your different terms. And when you author content, for instance, in this topic, you have several gloss terms being referenced. We hover a term, we have the definition here, but all of that is resolved thanks to a glossary map. Going back here, we see in this example, we have different topic refs with the glossary topics. And when the glossary map is published, we have access to individual topics. In the context of granularity, basically, we want to leverage the glossary map to resolve information, to make the content in this topic interesting and providing relevant information. But we would like also to provide access to the glossary as a full-fledged documentation. And a CDP, it's a breeze. It's a breeze because you have both the capacities to retrieve the information as it, but also to cross-reference different publications to the single glossary map here. So that means you publish once, but you can reuse the content from this glossary map for other sub-publications. Okay, moving forward then, the question also is about the granularity and the modularity of access. It's another use case with the restrictions. Typically, regularly, we have customers who need to implement restrictions on content because there are different content, there are confidential content, there is internal documentation. And then for that, we need to think about the mechanism, and it's based on metadata. And that means depending on the publication, and even by using databases, you can modularize, you can adapt content at the granular level and apply specific restrictions. In this case, we have metadata declared for different audience types, and we are able directly to bind the metadata to a given group of users and applying a restriction for them. As Géraldine said before, that will require not hundreds, but thousands of lines of code to implement such a feature. And that makes your life easier, of course, but it's a good way also to secure content. Another point which is important and interesting about granularity is the question of distinction between different types of content. In a CDP, you may have, for example, a book or an article. And what is the difference between both? The difference is that when you submit a query, when you make a search, you can have a lot of results, and the search engine is able to retrieve information at the topic level and to redirect you to the corresponding topics. That's good. But what happens when you have a specific documentation with a disclaimer, a legal disclaimer that must be read before reading the rest of the documentation, or when you need to ensure that a warning message about safety measures is acknowledged by the end users. So for that, the solution is using the document type and not as a book, but as an article. The article will force the end users to read the publication from the start. So that means in a case you keep a granular access to the topic with the book, and when you make a search, you can see the different results with the different topics. You can access directly to a topic. In the case of the article, you have the search results, which list the different topics. That's true, but you will be positioned at the beginning of the document to make sure that you read all the required information. And again, to achieve that, metadata is used with a specific metadata about the editorial type. We see here with the other meta, FT editorial type, article, or book. So that is a consideration, and it's not only about declaring the metadata and making sure that it works in the CDP. The CDP works fine. The question is, what are the documents that must follow this mechanism? What is the expected effect in the reading experience for specific sets of documentation? And this question often arises when migrating to the CDP, but it is also pretty important because it has a huge impact on the user experience, but also for legal requirements. Granularity is often bound linked to metadata, and particularly in the case of the CDP, because metadata is the crux of the application of the features. So I'm gonna describe more some metadata principles and how they are used in the CDP. Of course, depending on the project, there are the recurring candidates with metadata, author, create date, audience, prone info, other meta, sure. But I will consider the two main categories, the lifecycle management information and the subject information. In the context of delivery, actually, we make a distinction between the authoring metadata and the delivery metadata. We have the content discovery, where metadata provide descriptive information about content, title, author, keywords, anything that helps users to easily find and access relevant content, and which improves the overall user experience and ensures that valuable content is not overlooked. There is the content personalization, sub-product, a page for a group of products, the audiences, internal or public audiences, the search personalization, interesting, promoting or demote content, and also what relates to the search engine optimization, the SEO, where metadata plays a crucial role in improving the discoverability of content for the search engines, the bots, where you may use descriptive metadata, such as title tags or meta descriptions, and which can also influence, of course, the ranking and drive organic traffic for the content delivery platform. And the question of metadata is not only making distinctions, but also in the context of CDP, how to enrich it, because the CDP offers possibilities and how do you leverage them for your project. And I would like to make the analogy, when you have this analogy, you have a dinner, you are invited to a dinner in there are many delicious meals on the table and you bring wine. And of course, depending on the meals, you need to think about the wine you would like to bring, how it will accommodate, and you want to make sure that it will fit with the meal. It's the same with metadata, because you have metadata from the authoring on that were declared on the authoring side and for the delivery, but you can also enrich metadata, knowing that in the data connector in the CDP, in our CDP, we support by default some metadata. For example, VRM, version modification release, the VRM element and its attributes. Actually, they are already processed by default, and they are even returned as a concatenated metadata. But sometimes when you develop a custom plugin with DITA, you may have specific requirements for metadata, and you will generate your own metadata. And you need to make sure that you won't override the crucial information from a metadata that was provided by the CDP and which has a very precise function. So there's not a balance, but there are considerations to make how metadata are working together and how they may not or could conflict together. Going more in detail about enriching metadata, here is an example. We have the ability to create vocabularies, and those vocabularies are either provided as CSV files or RDF, and they are used both for synonyms or for hierarchical facets. In this example, besides the local itself, which is defined, we see that we have different terms on the same line. Amazing is a synonym of incredible, unbelievable. Yeah, why not? FT is an acronym because in technical documentation, there are a lot of acronyms, but the full term may be used also. And so the vocabulary can be used in this way for metadata. And also, a good example, a good use case is when you have your metadata declared with information in lowercase, but you would like to display it with an uppercase on the first letter because you want to display metadata to make it useful. It's the same for the hierarchical metadata. If you need to define a facet used in the search engine, you may need to rely on the vocabulary. And how does it look like? Typically like this. All of that actually are based on metadata. You have radio button, single values, you have checkboxes, it's a different behaviors. That means you can combine different metadata values together. Food chipper, heavy chipper are values from the drone type metadata. The radio button means just one value. And here we have the hierarchical metadata values displayed, and they are based on the vocabulary. And that means you can implement something much more complicated. With metadata, you can also influence and configure specific preferences for the user. Typically, as an administrator, I want to configure specific preferences for my users. I want them to access first to content with the source, which is database. And with the versions 10, 10.6.1, and with different document types, I can configure different priorities and results. The user's preferences are configured thanks to metadata, and they differ slightly from the influence of the results. What I described just before is related to the user's experience, but also the search engine in itself has its own logics, and typically using also what we call a search business rule means that we leverage metadata key and values to promote or demote content. Typically, we have legacy documentation. We don't want to make it visible at first sight when we start making a search in a portal, but we want to keep it visible in any case, because even though it's legacy documentation, it's still useful, and one never knows if it won't be searched by a specific developer or administrator. And for that, because the search results can be ordered with different rules, like here, we can decide on the order. The relevance remains the main and prior criteria. That's true, but we can influence by creating specific rules like this. Metadata is also used for the pretty URLs, to make them user-friendly, readable, and for SEO, we can use metadata, typically by including also string, hard-coded string, and dynamic information retrieved from the metadata available in a document. And that means you can also create additional rules for that will be used with the bots and for the SEO. Typically, in this case, we use title tags and we configure specific metadata for the display of the title tags. So here, as you can see, I have activated the Googlebot view, and I have configured the title, audience, and doc type informations metadata for the display for the bots. And here, this is the preview from a Googlebot, meaning that we retrieve the title of a document, either a topic or document, okay? Testing the conversion of attributes to elements, and the audience, which is the audience here, metadata, the value, and the tutorial for the doc type. It enriches the information for the bots and also for the quality of the search results. And the same, all of that is based on metadata for the robot indexing. Imagine you have content which must be indexed and archived, and you have other content which shouldn't. In this case, we have a screenshot of view with built-in metadata provided by the CDP and custom metadata, for instance, with audience, doc type, and source ID custom. And in this case, we retrieve the information that was configured. We have a custom rule which sets no index, no follow, no archive, and based on the metadata audience internal. Another rule based on the source name, which should be indexed, followed, but not archived. So I would like to describe a use case, which was really interesting. It's based on other meta. It's still related to metadata, but also to granularity. And it's a question of inheritance with other meta. So other meta is a very handy element. It's used for different purposes. You can use it for specific and custom metadata, which is not does not fit with a semantic existing element. It's quick and easy to use it. And the problem we had was related to the inheritance of other meta, because when you declare a metadata at the map level, you may expect to see it inherited at the topic level. And that means you don't have to author all the topics in a document because automatically it cascades to the different topics and subtopics. And that is quite handy and useful precisely when you must configure specific rules, typically for accessibility or for pagination or clusterization. All of that, because it relies on metadata, is important. But in the specification of DITA, the 1.2, the cascading of metadata with other meta, actually, apparently, we had contradictory information. It was supposed to cascade, and onto another page, it was indicated that no, it didn't cascade anymore. But between the application of the specification and the releases, the fix in DITA OT, it took not several months, but maybe more, much more. And there was a clarification in the DITA the DITA specification, the 1.3, the clarification, no, other meta does not inherit at topic level. It should not cascade. And then we had a fix later. We had a fix for DITA OT, and we had customers who were used to retrieve information propagated at the topic level, and once they migrated to a newer version of DITA OT, they noticed that they didn't retrieve the information at the topic level. And that was a challenge. How to do? What is possible? Typically, continuing using a version preceding the 3.5, because that is at this moment that the inheritance of all the meta stopped. Yeah. Finding revert to the update in the source code from DITA OT. It's quite challenging, tricky. No. Or just creating a custom DITA OT plugin. And that means on the customer side, if you have tech creators who are skilled and willing to do that, or content architects or developers, it's easy, it's implemented on our end. That's what we did. And we see here in this example, we have the map, the topic, other meta trees, Europe, and we have the other meta also declared for the topic. We may expect, we would like to retrieve the metadata with the key trees and the content Europe displayed in this rendering from a DITA OT vanilla. Actually, we noticed that we only retrieve at the topic level the pine tree, the first version. Going back here, we retrieve only this information. With a plugin, it's easy. We retrieved the information from the map and from the topic, and that made the life much easier for the tech traders, for the administrators from the CDP, to continue using and implementing the specific rules, both at the map level and at the topic level. Géraldine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gaspard. Thank you for the presentation and the examples. So a few takeaways from this session today. Your content has a life after authoring, and actually your content has, as you've seen, several lives after authoring in different places, in different way to display it. So yes, it doesn't end at authoring, and there is much more actually to do and to value after the content is created. Second point is that it's never too late to embrace dynamic content delivery. As Gaspard has mentioned it, I mean, working with legacy DITA content, or by the way, also non-DITA content, but working with legacy content that was thought, where DITA was thought and used for authoring only, is not really a problem. That's something actually that can be solved and that can be resolved thanks to the additional layer granularity management and metadata management that can enrich the initial contents of at any time in your story with DITA. You can actually move to this modern content delivery and embrace that. And finally, implementing DITA for authoring and delivery as well. So adding delivery to your practice of DITA is actually a way to also optimize and rethink your content strategy and enrich it. So it gives you some like new considerations regarding how you are envisaging and regarding your content strategy. So that's continuing delivery is actually a way also to view your content a different way and consider your content strategy a different way. So with this, I think I should give the mic back to Trish because we have a few questions and she is our moderator.
We do have many questions. So the first one, you said non-DITA content as well. What other formats do content delivery platforms manage?
Gaspard?
I would be tempted to say all of them, but no, a lot, many. That is interesting because, of course, DITA is sophisticated, it's rich and structured, but you could also have unstructured content types such as Markdown. And why it is interesting is that even with the recent releases of DITA, we're even able to manage to support Markdown or HTML in the context of data maps. So of course we have this possibility, but by default in the CDP and depending on the CDPs, but in our case, we have many options for different plugins with different format and possibilities. And even more than that, we have the ability to define custom plugins able to process content. And why it is important, it's because thanks to the CDP, you uniformize, you get something consistent across the different sources of content. Typically for the clusterization, when you apply clusterization, it's not only for data content. That means you could consider clusterizing a Word document with a data publication. And that becomes quite interesting at this moment.
Can you offer details for customizing the experience for the end user to fit not only for our branding, but our website platform as well, in a fluid and automatic loading of chapters, allowing us to integrate the content with our website search function?
Content for me or for you, Géraldine?
That's a pretty big one. Let me read it again. So I think there are several ways, actually, if I understand correctly, your question, you want to integrate your the search function and the display experience into your website. So there are several ways actually to see that. I would probably recommend that if you want to integrate this kind of flexibility of content display and content management that Gaspard showed here into a website-like environment, I would recommend probably to consider a portal, documentation portal that would be branded, that we can brand to your brand, if I may say, customized to your brand. Because this way you will not only benefit from the capability to display, as you were mentioning, the automatic loading of chapters, etc., but also all the capacity to manage the access rights, the contextualization, etc., of the content, rather than maybe pushing it to a website. But honestly, I think this is a question that would need to dig into, more precisely regarding your needs and what you are trying to achieve. So that's just not knowing much more about your project. That's how I would answer to it. But probably, I mean, just say hi if you want us to have like further discussion, and Gaspard will be probably more able to discuss and to get into more details by like a one-to-one discussion about what you are trying to achieve.
And there is your contact information right there. So absolutely. To what types of authoring tools can a CDP connect?
Again, many, as long as the authoring tools have the ability to connect with the CDP. And in our case, we have an API, we have specific mechanisms for verification, and depending on the authoring tools, there are different configurations. I don't know if I can mention partners, but I can say that in one case, we have a publishing implemented through a DITA plugin. They have a system where actually they rely on DITA, and they have we have developed a plugin just to publish and send information to our CDP. And for others, it's much more developed. They have taken this in charge with custom connectors that directly take the automation in charge. And for more rudimentary processes, I don't know if it's really the right term, rudimentary, but for simpler systems, for example, when you author documentation in Markdown, but you have a CI/CD process, you commit your documentation on Git, GitHub, GitLab, you could automate the process. Actually, the CDP is agnostic on not in the backend. It's pretty important, the difference between the DITA connector or a Markdown connector, but in the end, the end users, they are absolutely not aware of the original format. And so you could have developers who are much involved in the docs as code process. Docs as code means that they are writing in Markdowns, they have processes for the review and validation of content with tech writers, and after it's pushed automatically through a CI/CD pipeline, and it's published automatically thanks to the API. Yeah, many possibilities.
So another multi one here with the question. For each version of a document, for a different version of a certain software, let's say, you say that we could have different metadata, which means for each version to have a different title, different keywords, different descriptions for that document?
Basically, if you leverage your content with DITA values, you are profiling content with your different variants and versions, and actually it's just depending on the way you apply and you filter your content. But for that, we just rely on to the DITA OT. The distinction between the different metadata is more related to the authoring metadata, which are used, for example, for indexing of content in the CCMS, the retrievability of content in the CCMS context. For the authors, the release management, for example, the release management with the changes to release element. And actually, after in the delivery, you have information which is not directly visible. It's not displayed by default. You may want to display it. Maybe for that, you need a specific transformation or creating a rule, as I've described before for the SEO indexing. And that's actually, instead of thinking the difference between the metadata, I think we should consider the application of this metadata. And the fact is that in any case, content remains with data, it remains in a single place, in the data map, in the topics. And after, if you want to modularize and getting different versions of variants, it's based on the data value mechanisms.
I saw those stars to the right of different topic/chapters. Can an end user favorite, can they make it favorite certain chapters or different docs and have them grouped in their user content?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So we give the possibility to interact, let's say, with the content. So I think I have another question regarding also does the platform permit the end users to bookmark certain docs and to display them and link to their account? So yes, we have several possibilities actually to interact with content. Users can like, rate, feedback on the content that they've read. They can bookmark it, as you mentioned, and they can group it in personal books, let's say, where they group the content that they favor or that they use on a frequent basis to create their kind of personal books. So yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. Can you process Word documents as well with the CDP?
Yes, I think that in the when Gaspard mentioned actually the different authoring tools or different formats, yes, definitely.
And what is interesting in this case that you can process Word documents both as what we call unstructured documents, and then you can download that or having them as it, or you can retrieve information restructured, meaning that you can retrieve information based on sections, subsections, or depending on the configuration of the headings in the Word document, and you can have topics. Afterwards, you have a publication, and that means all the features, the actions that are available for DITA content, they will also be available for Word content. And even for metadata, of course, we don't have all the capacity of DITA with Word, but we have built-in in-house feature which is called the control file, which allows to add specific metadata for a given set of documents or for a document. So that means if you need to enrich metadata related for Word documents, you can use the control file and retrieve information that were declared also for DITA.
Well, at this, we have thank you very much for the answers. It sounds great so far. I'm looking forward to the next webinar you'll have. Well, we look forward to seeing you as well. We don't have any more questions, but if you do, quick, have a burning one, come and put it in the Q&A for us. This has been so very nice. I've learned a lot, and it's great as always to see you both. So we could just stay on a little bit, however you would like to do, or we could end.
Well, don't hesitate to reach out if you have more questions. You will get an email with the link to the webinar replay and our contact information. So feel free to reach out if you have more questions and you want to dig more into these topics. We'll be happy to answer. And with this, have a nice day, afternoon, or evening, and thank you very much for attending. See you soon.
Look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.